Picture this. Um, Paris, 1918, right? The city of lights, but shrouded in darkness. Streets are eerily empty. And in the distance, you can hear the rumble of German artillery. Paris, the heart of France, is teetering on the brink. You wanted to know more about the American experience in World War I, especially during the German Spring Offensive. And for this deep dive, well, we've gathered historical narratives, personal accounts, military reports, really, to try to bring this story to life.
And it's really important to understand the context here. By 1918, I mean, Europe had been locked in this brutal stalemate for years. I mean, years of trench warfare. It just decimated both sides. Millions dead, and entire nations, well, they were just exhausted. The German Spring Offensive, it was a last-ditch gamble, a desperate attempt to break that deadlock, to secure victory before American reinforcements could really tip the scales.
So let's unpack this German Spring Offensive a bit. It wasn't just one battle, was it?
No, not at all. It was a series of offensives, very carefully coordinated, all launched along the Western Front. The Germans, now bolstered by troops freed up from the Eastern Front after Russia's collapse, they aimed to overwhelm those Allied lines. Force a negotiated peace, that was the goal. And their initial targets, well, that was the British forces in the north. The hope was to cripple them before turning their attention south, towards Paris.
Reading through the sources, there's this real sense of urgency, a frantic race against time. The Germans were determined to achieve a decisive victory, and the Allies, well, they were scrambling just to hold the line.
Yeah, and their first two offensives, Operations Michael and Georgette, they inflicted heavy casualties, but they didn't achieve that decisive breakthrough they were looking for. The British, they were battered, pushed back, but they held firm, frustrating those German hopes for, a quick victory.
And that brings us to late May 1918, and Operation Blucher, the third phase of this offensive. This time, the Germans shifted their focus to the Chemin des Dames sector, a seemingly quiet section of the front, but it held the strategic importance, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The Chemin des Dames, it offered a direct route to Paris. And the Germans, they sensed an opportunity to amass this massive force for a surprise attack. And they achieved a shocking breakthrough. Overwhelmed the French defenders, created this gaping hole in the Allied lines.
And this is where that panic in Paris really sets in. The sources describe a city gripped by fear, just rumors of an imminent German invasion swirling through the streets. The government even started making preparations for a possible evacuation.
I mean, the situation was dire. The Germans, they were advancing rapidly, capturing tens of thousands of Allied soldiers, pushing ever closer to the French capital. Within days, they reached the Marne River. That's a mere 50 miles from Paris. The fate of France, maybe even the entire war, it was hanging in the balance.
And this is where the Americans enter the picture. They had declared war on Germany back in April 1917, but their army, well, was still pretty small, pretty inexperienced compared to the battle-hardened veterans of Europe.
Right, and there was this heated debate, actually, within Allied circles about how best to use these arriving American troops. Some, particularly French and British commanders who were desperate for reinforcements, they favored amalgamating American units into existing Allied divisions, provide immediate manpower, but, potentially dilute American command, American identity.
But General John J. Pershing, the commander of the American Expeditionary Forces, he fiercely opposed this idea, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely. Pershing, nicknamed Blackjack, for his stern demeanor and his insistence on discipline. He adamantly believed in maintaining an independent American army. He argued that American soldiers, though untested, they would fight more effectively under their own flag, their own leadership. Plus, he envisioned a future where the U.S. military, well, would be a force to be reckoned with on the world stage.
But with the situation in France deteriorating so rapidly, Pershing faced a tough decision. I mean, could he afford to hold back his troops while Paris was under threat?
Well, he recognized the urgency. He agreed to deploy American divisions to help bolster those crumbling French defenses. But he remained steadfast in his commitment to building a distinct American fighting force. A decision, by the way, that would have, well, significant ramifications for the future of the U.S. military.
And those divisions were the second and third, right? Hurriedly dispatched to the Chateau-Thierry region to try to block that German advance towards Paris.
Yes, exactly. These divisions, a mix of regular army soldiers and National Guardsmen, they found themselves thrust into the heart of this conflict, facing, a seasoned and determined enemy. And their journey to the front lines, it was a real testament to their resilience. Grueling marches, often lacking sleep, food, proper equipment. Imagine, for a moment, the 7th Machine Gun Battalion of the 3rd Division. Their convoy of Ford Model T trucks, already burdened with heavy equipment, they ran out of fuel miles from their destination. Many soldiers had to shoulder their gear and trudge the remaining distance, exhausted but undeterred.
And amidst all this chaos and exhaustion, there's that incredible story about Colonel Preston Brown of the 2nd Division. When a French general, face etched with worry, asked if the Americans could hold back that German onslaught, Brown replied with this unwavering confidence. He said, "General, these are American regulars. In 150 years, they have never been beaten. They will hold."
It's a quote that's it's resonated throughout history. It really captures that spirit of American determination in the face of, overwhelming odds. It's worth noting, though, while Brown's statement was certainly inspiring, it wasn't entirely accurate. American forces, they had experienced defeats in the past, of course. But his words, they reflect this unwavering belief in the American fighting spirit, a belief that would be tested in the crucible of battle.
So the stage is set. Exhausted Allied forces, a relentless German advance, and untested American troops arriving just in time. What happens next? It feels like, I don't know, a scene from a classic war film, A Clash of Titans.
Well, this is where we delve into the Battle of Belleau Wood, a seemingly insignificant patch of woodland that would become a crucible for the American forces, particularly the U.S. Marines, and really a turning point in the war. But before we explore the horrors and the heroics of Belleau Wood, let's just take a moment to reflect on those extraordinary circumstances that led to this confrontation. The German Spring Offensive, a bold gamble that nearly succeeded, it had brought Europe to the brink. And the fate of nations, the lives of millions, it rested on the shoulders of these young American soldiers, many of whom, by the way, had never seen combat before.
A story of courage, sacrifice, and really the forging of a national identity. A story that continues to resonate today, reminding us of the human cost of conflict, but also that enduring power of the human spirit. We'll be right back to explore the Battle of Belleau Wood and the evolving role of the American forces in World War I. So we left off with those American troops arriving in France, exhausted and with this daunting task ahead of them. Now let's shift our focus to a place that would become, synonymous with American courage and sacrifice, Belleau Wood.
This dense, seemingly insignificant woodland, it's about 60 miles northeast of Paris, and it would transform into this battleground of extraordinary ferocity. June 1918, the Germans, having been halted at the Marne, they dig in, turning Belleau Wood into a fortress.
Yeah, the sources really paint a vivid picture of this transformation. Thick trees, tangled undergrowth, all laced with trenches, machine gun nests, barbed wire. It sounds more like a nightmare than a woodland.
It was. And for both sides, Belleau Wood held this strategic importance that went beyond its size. For the Germans, holding Belleau Wood meant maintaining their position on the Marne, keeping the pressure on Paris. For the Allies, capturing it, that would be a crucial step in pushing the Germans back and, bolstering that flagging morale.
So the stage is set for a brutal fight, and it's the U.S. Marines, part of the 2nd Division, who are tasked with taking Belleau Wood.
Yes, and they faced a formidable challenge. The Germans were well entrenched with artillery support and years of combat experience. The Marines, while eager to prove themselves, they were, relatively new to the horrors of modern warfare.
And those initial attacks on June 6th, they were devastating. One account describes the assault on Hill 142, a key position near Belleau Wood, as just this scene of unimaginable carnage. The Marines, advancing in waves, they were met with just withering machine gun fire, suffered heavy casualties.
Yeah, nearly 90% of the officers and 50% of the men in that first attacking wave, they were killed or wounded. A brutal lesson in the realities of 20th century warfare. The Marines, initially, clinging to these outdated tactics like advancing in tight formations, they paid a heavy price for their inexperience.
And yet, despite those horrific losses, they did eventually capture Hill 142. It must have taken incredible courage to press on in the face of such overwhelming firepower.
Absolutely. The Marines, they displayed extraordinary bravery, determination. You see it in the accounts from the battle, like the story of Gunnery Sergeant Dan Daly. He rallied his men with those, now famous words, "Come on, you sons of bitches, do you want to live forever?"
Daly, already a recipient of 2 Medals of Honor, would earn a 3rd for his actions at Belleau Wood. His story, and the stories of countless other Marines who fought there, it speaks to that raw courage, that unwavering commitment of these men.
Yeah, their tenacity, it earned them the grudging respect of the German soldiers who had initially, underestimated these newcomers to the war. Some accounts even suggest that it was during this battle that the Germans started referring to the Marines as Teufelhund, devil dogs.
And while the origins of that nickname are debated, the image of the ferocious, tenacious devil dog, it stuck. became deeply embedded in the lore of the U.S. Marines.
But the fight for Belleau Wood itself, well, it was far from over. The Marines then launched a full-scale assault on the woods themselves, and that's where things got really grim.
The sources describe a brutal attritional fight. The woods were a maze of trenches, machine gun nests, hidden snipers. I mean, imagine the constant artillery bombardments, the poison gas attacks, the the lack of sleep, food.
Yeah.
It must have been a living hell.
It was. The Marines fought for every inch of ground, inch by bloody inch, suffering heavy casualties but refusing to yield. They were learning, though, adapting their tactics to this new kind of warfare.
So they're fighting with incredible bravery. But are they learning from those early mistakes? Are they adapting their tactics to better suit this brutal environment?
Yes, and this is crucial. While those initial attacks were costly, the Marines, they started to incorporate lessons learned from their French and British allies. They began to use cover and concealment more effectively, coordinating their attacks with artillery support, fighting in smaller, more mobile units.
That tactical evolution, it was essential to their eventual success. The sources describe how they started using grenades and trench mortars more effectively, even employing captured German weapons against them. They were learning to fight fire with fire, adapting to those brutal realities of trench warfare.
And they were showing this remarkable capacity for innovation,
Yeah.
improvisation, utilizing everything at their disposal to gain an advantage.
It took weeks of intense fighting. But the Marines, along with other American and Allied units, they finally captured Belleau Wood on June 26th. What was the significance of this victory, both militarily and symbolically?
Militarily, it was a relatively small victory. But symbolically, oh, its impact was enormous. It demonstrated to the Allies and to the Germans that the American forces were a force to be reckoned with. They had proven their courage, their tenacity, and their ability to adapt, to learn under fire.
It seems Belleau Wood was more than just a battle. It was a crucible where the American fighting spirit was forged and where the U.S. military, well, began to come of age on the world stage. But what about the wider war? How did this experience and the influx of American troops ultimately impact the outcome of World War I?
That's where I'll pick up in part 3. Belleau Wood was just the beginning. The American forces, now battle-hardened, increasingly confident, they would go on to play a pivotal role in those final Allied offensives that would ultimately lead to Germany's defeat.
So we've journeyed through those early days of American involvement in World War I, witnessing their resilience at Chateau Thierry and that hard-fought victory at Belleau Wood. But now, with American troops pouring into France, how did their presence really impact the war's final outcome?
Well, Belleau Wood stands as this powerful symbol of, American courage and sacrifice. It's important to remember it was just one battle in a vast and complex conflict. The real significance of American involvement, I think, lies in that shift in momentum it created. Remember, before the U.S. entered the war, the Allies, they were on the edge of exhaustion, resources depleted, morale crumbling, and that influx of fresh American troops, brimming with this determined fighting spirit, it injected a much-needed surge of energy, of manpower into the Allied cause.
Yeah, it seems like it wasn't just about numbers, though. The sources highlight a psychological impact as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. The Germans, they were confident in their military superiority. They banked on this swift victory before American forces could fully mobilize. And the tenacity of the Americans, their willingness to fight so fiercely for every inch of ground, well, it disrupted those plans, shook German confidence. Allied soldiers, seeing the Americans resolve, they found their own spirits rekindled, while doubts, they started to creep into the minds of the German high command.
One source even mentions a German order specifically emphasizing the importance of defeating the Americans to reassert their dominance. Seems like Belleau Wood had rattled them, challenged their perception of the American soldier as inexperienced, easily overcome.
Exactly. The fighting spirit displayed at Belleau Wood, particularly by the Marines, it forced the Germans to reevaluate their enemy. And as more American troops arrived, well, that balance of power on the Western Front, it began to tilt irrevocably in favor of the Allies. By the summer of 1918, over 750,000 American soldiers were in Europe. And that number, well, it just kept climbing steadily.
It's staggering to think about the scale of that American mobilization. They truly were a sleeping giant awakened, weren't they?
They were, and once roused, their industrial might, those vast manpower reserves, they became a decisive factor in the war. Germany, already stretched thin after years of fighting, they just couldn't match that influx of American troops and resources. But it wasn't just about brute force. The Americans, as we've seen, they were quick learners, adapting to the realities of modern warfare, becoming a truly formidable fighting force.
So they learned from those costly battles, embracing new technologies, new tactics.
Exactly. They proved adept at integrating new weapons like the machine gun, the tank, into their strategies, and they adopted more effective tactics like utilizing artillery barrages, fighting in smaller, more mobile units. This evolution, combined with their sheer numbers and that unyielding determination, well, it paved the way for those final Allied offensives that ultimately broke the German army.
And the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, launched in September 1918, it really stands out as a pivotal moment in that final push.
Absolutely. This massive offensive involving over 1 million American troops, it was one of the largest and bloodiest battles in American history, a brutal grinding fight. But it shattered those German lines and ultimately led to their request for an armistice in November 1918.
So as we look back on this pivotal period in history, what's the lasting legacy of American involvement in World War I?
It's a complex legacy, one marked by both triumph and tragedy.
Yeah.
Over 116,000 Americans made the ultimate sacrifice. Countless others returned home bearing the physical and emotional scars of war. But their sacrifices were not in vain. The war, it marked America's emergence as a global military power, a force capable of shaping the course of world events. It also demonstrated the nation's capacity for sacrifice and its commitment to defending democracy on a global scale.
And it's crucial to remember that this war, like all wars, it left an indelible mark on the American psyche, shaping its foreign policy in the decades to come and leaving this enduring legacy of patriotism, but also a profound awareness of the cost of war.
Indeed. World War I, it was a defining moment for the United States. A coming of age on the world stage that would shape its destiny for generations to come. A story of courage, of sacrifice, of transformation. A story that continues to resonate with us today.
And that concludes our deep dive into American grit in World War I. We've only scratched the surface of this complex and multifaceted history, and we encourage you to delve deeper into the sources, to explore those personal accounts, and to reflect on the enduring legacy of this pivotal conflict. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our future deep dives. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep questioning the world around you.